So one of the most tragic effects of substance use disorder is the affects the entire family. One of the most unimaginable traumas we can imagine as parents is watching our own children struggle with addiction. However, many of us may not consider the ripple effects experienced by both grandparents and grandchildren. Katrina Norris' story is unfortunately all too common across the United States, as so many grandparents are thrust back into the role of primary caregiver, while their own child is actively using and while trying to navigate the complex web of the child welfare system. So let's learn from Katrina's story.
Hi, I'm Katrina Norris. I'm the Executive Director for Indiana State Psychiatric Hospital Network, and I am honored to be here today to talk to you about addiction, the family disease. So the American Medical Association and the American Society for Addiction Medicine have varying definitions of what addiction is or what it is not. And I really prefer the ASAM definition because it recognizes the brain chemistry and how the brain chemistry is changed in the addicted brain. I call that the hijacked brain most of the time. So wanted to share those with you and just really tell you about my story and how I got here, because addiction is a complex, chronic, treatable disease. We know that. We have all the research. We have MAT. We have multiple courses of treatment for addiction. What we often fail to recognize, or what we fail to talk about, is that addiction is a family disease. It's far more complex than just the person suffering with substance use disorder. So when I say it's the family disease, I say that because it impairs severe dysfunction in a family unit. And I could give you a million examples of how, when you have a loved one who is suffering with substance use disorder, how you cope with that person and how you cope with your other family members because of that person, how you interact with each other, it changes drastically once the person that you love has a substance use disorder. You love your child, you hate the disease, and that, I think, is what makes this so complex. So I'm going to share with you a little bit about my story and how we got here. Caitlin is my daughter, and Caitlin was a honor student. She was an athlete. She graduated high school midterm. She was sassy and very had the fire, I guess, of what you want from a strong, independent woman. And I thought, you know, this is going to be okay, even though she was a little sassy. It was, we had our days like most parents do with adolescents. At 19, Caitlin had a child, and I wasn't exactly thrilled to become a grandma at 39. So that was not exactly where I wanted to be, but life happens. You take your blessings as they come. And she had a C-section. So when she left the hospital, she left with 90 Percocets for a C-section. And I didn't really think about it in that sense of, boy, that's a lot of opioids to leave. I've never had a C-section. Who am I to judge? And someone's prescribing practices, loved her OB doc, trusted him. And that's where our journey began with prescription opioids, which most families can obviously relate to, that we've seen this epidemic unfold based on prescription drugs. Within 6 months, we were into IV heroin use. So it didn't take long for her brain to change. And that wasn't enough. That prescription medication no longer fulfilled the craving in the brain. I mean, it was a very short window of time. So like I said, things got worse, and very rapidly got worse, in the sense that from taking prescription drugs that were given to me by a doctor, so they're safe, and that myth, to IV street level heroin. You don't know what's in it. My granddaughter was born. And by the time she was 18 months old, I had guardianship of her. So how we got to that place was multiple overdoses, multiple arrests, multiple failed treatment attempts. And ultimately, my child had become homeless, and not homeless and living under the bridge with the paper sack stigma, but homeless and couch surfing. Not that she couldn't come home, that was always on the table. You can always come home, but there were rules at home. And in addiction, they don't like the rules. The rules don't work for them in getting their needs met and their cravings. So what ended up happening was drug dealing. Drug dealing happened because that was a means to support this habit that now was a necessity. And I think that is what most families don't know, is when you're addicted to opioids, you just want to be well. And it's no longer about getting high. It's about staying well. It's about not being sick. And so she was chasing wellness by her definition, because I knew the clinical manifestations. I knew the things that were happening in her brain. And it put me in a very awkward position where she would talk to people and they'd say, your mom saved my life. And I couldn't save hers. So you can see how complex this got for someone who knows it and knows this disease in and out and how to treat it, but I couldn't get her what she needed. And ultimately, one of the biggest days of my career, I'm going to ribbon cutting to open a treatment facility, excited, on a project I'd worked years on, and I'm driving with my best dress hung up in the back seat and my heels, and I'm so excited. We're going to cut the ribbon. We're going to open North Star Recovery Center, and the radio clicks on, and it is our local news, local radio station, and I hear Jeff Lane's voice come across the airwaves, and my daughter's been arrested for dealing heroin, and she's posted bond within 6 hours of arrest. So I'm like, oh my gosh, I got to go open this facility. I've got all these people waiting. We've planned months for it. What am I going to do? And I've got to get on stage and I've got to talk about this and how we're going to save people. And my kid just got arrested. So it was, again, that internal tug of war. What do? You're going to stain my day. And that's how you feel as a parent, as this was my day that I'd poured my heart and soul into for years. And again, the disease of addiction had put a strain on that. So the emotions that families feel and that they experience is like a roller coaster. You love them, they're your child, and you remember the sweet, innocent little girl, or you remember going to softball games and all of these other pieces of childhood memories, and then they've wrecked my plans for the day, and now I've got to compartmentalize my feelings, and I've got to go on stage, and I've got deliverables to do because that's my job, and hold it together. And I remember that day so vividly because I come off stage, my CEO is coming in to check on me, and he was like, man, you knocked it out of the park, way to go, way to go. And when I turned around, I was just flooded in tears, and he was like, what is wrong? And I have to stand there and tell my boss they've arrested my kid. And I know the prison sentence that it carries. But yet I know she has to be accountable for breaking the law. So you're just constantly in this mixed emotion state. And if you're in a professional position, or any position for that matter, as a family member, you still have to survive. So you still got to go to work. You still got to do your job. And it is absolutely insanity, as much for the person suffering from the disease as the family that's coping with it. One of the emotions that most families experience, and they sometimes don't know it, is enabling. And that enabling comes from parental guilt. You go back in your head and you think of everything you've ever done wrong, like parenting comes with, a guide or something. Here's how you raise perfect kids. Every kid is different, but you really beat yourself up and you think about, did I miss a red flag? Should I have put her in this extracurricular activity? Should we have attended more church services? Where did I go wrong? How did I do this and end up with a person suffering from substance use disorder that I love so much, that had so much potential? And families will start to make excuses for behaviors. They will give the person money. They'll blame other people. Oh, and I'm as guilty as anybody for that. And I knew better. I knew better. I was a trained professional and I knew better. But I did make excuses for her behavior. I did blame people for her behavior. It was the crowd she was running with. It was the person she was dating. And that's all enabling behavior. There's also more. There's more. It's more complex. There's more emotions. There's anger, there's resentment, there's hurt. And for Caitlin and her situation, I already had her daughter. I had guardianship of her daughter and was caring for her daughter, who had lots of questions. And you don't want to have conversations with, a 2 or 3 year old about substance use disorder. She came up pregnant again. And so you talk about mad, you talk about anger and hurt, and how could you do this again? You already have one that I'm raising, and now you have another. And I was adamant. I was not getting involved. I was not taking this baby. She was not putting me through this again. And I held strong for a long time until I was teaching a class at the IU East campus, and my phone rang, and it was Reed Health, and I answered, stepped outside my classroom and took it. And they said, we're care flighting your grandson to Methodist. And I was like, my what? Your grandson. He was just born. And I was like, oh, it's too early. That's premature. He's in respiratory distress. That's all I can tell you. My daughter was incarcerated when he was born. So nobody would give me any information because she was an offender. They have policies they have to follow. I didn't know his name. I didn't know where he was going. I didn't know Riley had a NICU inside of Methodist. I didn't know anything. All I knew is if you're care flighting in February, something's seriously wrong. So that was a Thursday when he was born. I finally tracked him down on Saturday. And I'm still adamant I was not getting involved. And because she was incarcerated when he was born, DCS was obviously called, and they called me. Why don't you take him? You got the other one. I was not prepared at all for him. But as soon as I got to the NICU and I saw him, that emotion come in. And even though I had resentment and I had hurt, I was like, okay, I can't let a kid go to the system. This is my blood. He's my blood. And he's super cute too, so that helps. It's kind of hard. And I held him that first time, and he had had no skin-to-skin contact. Remember, she was an offender. She was handcuffed to the bed. So he had had no skin-to-skin contact, and they had his breathing under control, etc., which was good. And the first thing I said is, what's in his system? And they said, well, the records we received, his UDS was clean. I said, there's no way. She was only in jail 2 days before he was born. So when she went to jail, she went into withdrawal, which then led to premature birth, kicked her into labor is what it did. And I was like, there's no way. That's not possible. You can't clean your system in 2 days. And one of the nurses behind me was speaking to a colleague, and the term junkie was in their conversation. And I don't know if that was about my grandson. Trick baby was said when I was sitting in that NICU. I don't know if that was about my grandson, but I remember sitting there holding him and hearing those words and going, words matter. Stigma hurts families, because that's a human life to me. It doesn't matter how he was conceived, how he came into the world, etc. That stigma and the things that people hear, they stick with you. So they're telling me he's fine, and they want a discharge plan, and we're working on, getting everything set up, and talk about a scramble. Go ahead and set a nursery up in 24 hours or so, and work full time and have another child at my age. It's painful. Hour 96, Camden, my grandson, started to display the symptoms of neonatal abstinence syndrome, or NAS. So it took him 96 hours to start to show those symptoms. So of course, you look at the stats and they say, well, 7 of every 1,000 babies are diagnosed with NAS. And that doesn't sound too bad, 7 of 1,000, until you put it in perspective, which is every 19 minutes in our country, according to the CDC, babies are being born with NAS. And it is something like I've never experienced in my life. I can remember the social worker saying, oh, it's like colic, but a little bit worse. And I was like, okay, colicky babies, we know what to do with babies. And I'm a mom, and we hug them and we kiss them and we love them. Not in my brain going, you couldn't love addiction out of your daughter. Love didn't save her, because God knows I had enough love to save her. And it didn't. So 13 days in the NICU, morphine process of weaning my grandson before he could come home. And when I brought him home, I'm thinking colic. It's going to be like colic. That's what they told me. That was putting it mildly. So he was a baby like I'd never seen before. And so when I would think about how widely varied the symptoms are, the manifestations are, I lived it. You couldn't feed him, you couldn't bathe him, you couldn't change his diaper without him screaming. This just high pitch doesn't even define how he screamed. Sensitive to touch, sensitive to sound, hyperactive reflexes. Like, for example, if I would cough or sneeze, he would jump out of the skin. Well, all babies have a startle reflex. His startle reflex was impacted up until over a year old. He had a very abnormal startle reflex. Fortunately, we did not go into seizure activity, but we did see the jerking that is often a clinical presentation of NAS. The biggest issues with Camden was he didn't sleep. He was not a normal baby. He did not sleep. You think newborns, they sleep 18 hours a day. He was like an insomniac. So up until he was 15 months old, he didn't sleep through the night. And I was still running a hospital every day. And it is, I have all these cute pictures of him, and he looks great. And if you look at me, I've got like these huge circles under my eyes because I was getting up every 2 to 3 hours with him. And he just looks happy as can be. And I'm looking like, I'm exhausted because I am. And he was such a tough baby that you sit back and you think about it and you go, I never knew about why someone would shake a baby. You read about shaken baby syndrome, and we educate people about shaken baby syndrome. And in the back of your head, we're all judgmental, whether we want to admit it or not. We go, why would anybody shake a baby? Well, I know why people shake babies. I finally got it. I finally understood, because there were so many times I would lay him in the little mama-roo thing that bounces. It's supposed to simulate the womb and calm babies. I would have to strap him in and walk away because I was so frustrated. You can only take so many hours of high-pitched crying, screaming, and what traditionally works to calm an infant didn't work for him. You couldn't rub soothing lotion on him. You couldn't hold him. Swaddling worked for a while, but not forever. So a lot of times it was just, I've got to walk away. He's safe. I've got to walk away. I've got to get myself together. I get it. I know now why this can happen to anybody, to any family, because it's hard. It is so hard. And then your brain races about, okay, what's next? And I was probably overzealous in thinking about long-term outcomes. And I can remember going to the pediatrician's office, every 3 months or whenever you go for your checks, and saying, is everything okay? Is everything okay? And the pediatrician saying, he's fine. Look at him on the growth chart. He's a miracle. This is fantastic. And I'm like, Doc, he's not sleeping, and I'm not sleeping, and this is not safe for anybody. And even the physician who was my daughter's pediatrician her whole life, saying, oh, it's okay, he'll get there, he'll sleep eventually. And I kept asking the doctor, how can we see what's next, what's going to happen? And only time's going to tell that. Only time's going to tell if there are learning disabilities. I think about the predisposition and fear things like, what does the future hold if he breaks a bone? How are we going to cope with pain? Because I know his brain already knows what that substance makes him feel like, and scared to give him anything. I was so afraid to try anything because I know how his brain was wired in utero. And so that has been interesting. The fear of SIDS was so real for me that if he would sleep a 4-hour block, I would be up in there checking to see if he was breathing, because I knew all that stuff, and it made me extremely anxious. I can remember calling my husband. My husband works 3rd shift in the middle of the night. You've got to come home from work. I can't do this anymore. And he's like, oh my goodness, this is serious. The impact was so serious that we had to ask for family medical leave time, not because of Camden per se, but because I couldn't handle it. It was impacting me emotionally so much that I'd be in the middle of the floor crying while he was crying. And so it was that moment where you go, I'm not good enough. I've never been good enough. And remember, I talked about those emotions, and then you get angry because you see this baby tremoring, you see this baby not sleeping. And who do you get mad at? I got mad at my daughter. Why would you do this? Why would you put him through it? But she's still my daughter. So you can't hate your child. You hate the disease. And it just brings all of these emotions in simultaneously that it becomes overwhelming. The memorable moments that she's missed with her children, they can't come back. She will never see her daughter go to preschool the first day. She'll never see that first Easter, the first time her son ate, a solid food. And that brings those emotions back too. Like, I'm not this child's parent, but I'm having to act as this child's parent. And again, you get angry, you get resentful, and your family unit is so impacted. If I can just tell you about the jealousy, we have 2 other children besides Caitlin in our family unit. And, they won't say, oh, we're jealous of Caitlin. They're not going to say that. But the reality is they are, because she takes the time, she takes the energy, she takes the money. And if it's not her, it's the children that we're raising for her. So I've got 6 grandkids, and 2 of them live with me. Those other 4 grandkids feel that strain. So it creates jealousy and tension in the family unit from the sibling side. It also impacts the marital relations. My husband and I are at a place in our life and our careers where we should be able to do things by ourselves and not have to worry about childcare. But we do. The money, my goodness. I've spent a lot of money because of the disease of addiction, not just in treatment facilities and outpatient and all of the other options, but in childcare. Childcare is extremely expensive, but it's also a health issue. I'm older. I'm doing what people traditionally do in their 20s and their 30s, which is normal child rearing age. So it impacts your health, both physical and mentally. Fortunately, I'm still here, but I don't know how I'm here. I'm just still here. So this disease is not just of that person, but it has literally impacted our entire family unit and our entire family functioning. And always on guard. You know, it used to be before Camden was born and before Caitlin was incarcerated, every time the phone would ring, my heart would sink. It's another overdose. Is this that call that every parent fears? And I don't have that fear today, but I had to prepare for the worst and hope for the best. For the past 5 years now, we're looking at going on 5 years total. So how do you help them? That's the $1 million question, is how do you help them? When do you tough love them? How do you still love your child that's inside that trapped, hijacked brain? And it is hard. And all I can say is they're going to choose those drugs over you. They're going to choose the drugs over your children, their children. I mean, they're going to choose it over everything. And it's not because they don't love you or they don't love their children. That brain has been so hijacked, they can't not be well. And that's what I want to stress to families. As frustrating as the lying, the manipulation, the stealing, all of the negative attributes of addiction are, is they're literally trapped in their own head and their body is physically responding. Can they die in withdrawal? No, but they'll wish they were dead. And a lot of people will take their lives to avoid that. So it is really about families knowing you got to know your resources, when to reach out and when to ask for help. That was hard for me. Is, you know, I knew the treatment facilities. I knew the MAT options. I knew about Narcan. I was trained in Narcan. I still carry Narcan in my bag everywhere I go, 7 days a week. There's support groups. You know, Al-Anon is fantastic for families, and people laugh at me. I've got great supports. I'm so fortunate to have great supports. But one of the greatest, most convenient supports I had came from a group on Facebook. And it was a Facebook group about parents of addicts, and people would share their stories and they would comment and they would pray for one another. And it was something that I could access at any time. You know, Facebook is always on. You can scroll through at 2 o'clock in the morning when Camden's been up for the 3rd time. And it was, I didn't feel alone. You've got to rely on people. You've got to be able to ask for help. And that was so hard for me to tell people I can't do anymore. I'm going to break. But you really do. You have to take care of yourself. And I started to see the symptoms, like my weight fluctuated greatly. Either I was packing on the pounds because at 2 o'clock, if he's eating, I'm eating, or I was significantly dropping weight. And if you would have talked to me from a clinical standpoint, or if someone would ever get a hold of my journals, my personal journals that I write in, they would say she's clinically depressed, because I had all of those signs and those symptoms. I had sleep disturbance, I had weight disturbance, I had emotional moments of, you know, outbreaks, and it feels lonely. I mean, it really does. And that's why the supports are so important. So is it worth it? It's worth it. Probably couldn't have told me that a few months ago when he still wasn't sleeping. I now would say it's worth it, because today I can look at Carissa. She's almost 6 years old. She's going to start kindergarten in a week, and her ACEs score is a 5, the same as her mom's. And that's important to me, because I know how then to send in the preventative measures and put the supports in place. Camden's ACEs score is a 2. And he was born in distress that we can't imagine. I mean, he couldn't breathe. And that for me is a fear. It'd be terrible not to be able to breathe. And then he went through all of the physical ailments, but his ACEs score as of today is a 2. So it was worth it, because had I not intervened, his ACEs score would be extremely higher. As hard as it is, as many times as I've said, what am I doing? I must be out of my mind. I can look back today. I can look at them today and say, okay, now we know what's next. and how to prepare that transition back. The other is true of Caitlin. And I very firmly have said this for a very long time. Dead people can't recover. We cannot give up on our loved ones. We have to be trained and ready to respond with things like Narcan, because if they're dead, they can't recover. Now, how many times is enough? I don't know that answer. For each family, it's different. And we know addiction is a lifelong disease. It's a chronic, relapsing, complex disease. But today she is 17 months sober, not by her own choice. I say the Department of Correction was the one place she couldn't sign herself out of. You know, after multiple failed treatment options, she couldn't sign herself out of prison. So am I glad she got convicted and went to prison? Obviously, no, that's not a proud mom badge you wear, but it kept her alive. And I want other families to know, you've got to find your balancing act of when are you enabling, when are you not, and how to cut it off. Yeah, education, support, family therapy, all of those things are important for families to do and to know. And you have to read and know what you're reading too, because there's a lot of stuff that I read that I was like, that's not academic, that's not right. And being able to sort and filter through when is enough for a family. I can't answer that. I can only say that for my family, we're going to give it another shot. And so when she comes home and she meets her children, she has a lot of acclimating to do, and we have a lot of challenges ahead of us in the coming months, but she's recovered at this point, and I'm going to support her as she makes this journey into long-term recovery, which we know is possible.
Thank you, Katrina, for that very heartfelt and moving story, and helping us get a glimpse into the life of caring for someone with substance use disorder. So we do thank you for that. Katrina, are you on the phone with us right now?
Hi, I am.
Hey, Katrina, great to hear from you. Well, we learned over the Dr. Kiesel session that Dr. Anwar and I both have some old eyes. So I have my laptop now so we can better read the questions as they come in. So we would love to open this up to questions and discussions amongst our participants. Is there anyone who has any questions for Katrina who is comfortable asking those by unmuting themselves and asking those questions?
Yeah, I have a question for Katrina. This is Alex Buchanan. I'm a project manager with the Indiana University Interprofessional Practice and Education Center. Great job, Katrina. Thank you for presenting and sharing that information. I guess the question I have, because the last couple of years I've worked in addictions-related content, and I'll get approached from family members or friends who have individuals in their life suffering from substance use disorder. And the story you just told is so similar to a lot of the stories or a lot of the scenarios I'm given. And when it's an individual who really hasn't come to terms with having SUD, but it's really starting to impact the family, and it's starting to, cause infighting, and they've caught the person, stealing from them, and they're trying to balance, tough love from hearing that the individual will go out in the streets and maybe overdose. And I know there's been, motivational interviewing discussions and things like that I've heard of in the past, but I just wonder if you have any advice for folks who have, kids who had SUD but really haven't come to terms with it yet, and kind of finding, and it's kind of touching on what you've already talked about, but finding that balance between helping and enabling.
That's an excellent question. Thank you. It's really individualized. I make jokes and I deal with stress by humor, which you might have picked up on with some of my anxious body language. It's kind of hard to watch yourself on a playback. But I always would say things like, as a mother, we have to really manage that nurturing. Not that fathers can't be nurturing, because they certainly can, and I was raised by a single father, but I couldn't bear things like my child being hungry. And you know, that's a great manipulative trick of someone suffering from substance use disorder. I need money, I'm hungry, because that's the one thing that most parents can't bear, is the ideal of a hungry child. And I would say, well, then let me send a pizza to where you're at, or let me bring you something to eat, because my fear, the underlying fear was, she's going to die on my dime. If I give her $10, if I give her $20, that can be the shot that kills her. And then I have to live with that. So really, it's very individualized in finding your balance. Of course, my daughter knew my profession. She knew how active I was in the communities and the training, and she didn't cross me in a traditional way that a lot of parents suffer. Like, she never stole from me. Not that she didn't manipulate me, because she certainly did, but she never stole from me because she knew I would have her arrested. Because when she was in jail, I could sleep, and she knew that about me. And so I think for families, that's a really hard thing to do, is turn your child over to the criminal justice system for a disease that they have. And for other families, that's a really easy thing. That's a really easy boundary. So it really is such an individualized decision. And there's a lot of motivational interviewing techniques that can help, and also just pure education. You know, so many families unfortunately don't know the ins and outs, and I call it the tricks of the trade, which is probably not appropriate, but that is the normal behaviors of manipulation, of identity theft, of all of those things that families experience, and they don't know what to do with. So I wish I had that answer. If I did, I think it would be a best-selling book, and I could make a lot of money and retire if I had the black and white answer to that question, but it certainly was a great one. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Alex, for that question. If you have other questions from the audience, either unmute yourself like Alex did, or put it into the chat. So Katrina, I guess we've chatted since we recorded that about a month and a half ago. Can you give us an update of where your daughter is and where your grandchildren are at on their journey?
Well, thanks, Cody. I wasn't expecting that question. You caught me off guard. My daughter is actually in a pretty fluid spot right now. She is completing phase 4 of the Recovery While Incarcerated program, which is Indiana Department of Corrections substance abuse continuum that they have built in at their facilities, which will, upon completion of that at the end of this month, will lead her to a release in November. But the Department of Correction has also filed a CTP petition on her behalf, which then lands in the county of conviction for any offender with her level of felony, that she potentially could be released on house arrest for the remainder of her sentence. So that's why I said it's a fluid situation. It could be the end of this month, or it could be the week of Thanksgiving that she will come home, and we will start our transitional process. My grandchildren are fantastic. My granddaughter loves kindergarten, and I'll just have a proud grandma moment and say they've been in school a couple weeks now, and she can already read her 10 sight words. So I'm pretty excited about her learning progression, and my grandson is doing very, very well. I just saw a colleague of mine in the participants box here, and I had posted some pictures of him earlier, and he's growing and he's doing well. And the only thing I can't seem to get under control now is his hair.
Wonderful. Other questions from the audience? Or Dr. Anwar, do you have any questions?
I have a question, and I struggle with myself as well. You have mentioned in the recovery journey for your daughter the role the criminal justice system has played. It has been both positive and sometimes not so positive. What do you think that the criminal justice system, because they become involved one way or the other with the people with substance use disorder, what role can the criminal justice system play and how we can incorporate medication-assisted treatment in the recovery journey for people who are incarcerated?
That's a great question, and I think they are responding as good as they can given their knowledge base. There's a lot of jails that are building therapeutic environments. I know a couple of jails are looking at use of MATs and have implemented pilots, and that's phenomenal. But I will tell you, I have to give props because the Indiana Department of Correction has evidence-based programming in place that really mirrors the full continuum of care that we use in the free world. And they do utilize Vivitrol. I don't know if everyone on the call is aware, but the most trafficked item outside of cell phones within Department of Correction facilities are Suboxone. So they are definitely not on board with that part of medication assisted treatment. However, they do offer Vivitrol shots. We've discussed that as part of Caitlin's transition. Does she need the Vivitrol shot? Does she want the Vivitrol shot 30 days prior to release as a safeguard and in preparation for a relapse, which hopefully won't happen, but we know the complexity of the disease. So.
Thank you so much. And I agree that it needs to be incorporated somewhat, and we are working towards removing that barrier when it comes to buprenorphine as well for treatment within the criminal justice system. And there are concerns about the dissemination of Suboxone out of the criminal justice system, but at the same time, Vivitrol, like you said, is being used, and in some cases it is very successful. So I also believe the criminal justice system can play a huge role, because it provides that structured environment which for some patients is needed, but at the same time, not all the programs are doing it in the way that is evidence-based. So we just need to work on that piece of it.
Absolutely. And funding is always the bear to outcomes. Everybody is jockeying for funding, and I say sometimes we're fishing from the same pond for funding streams. And if we can fund it and we can collect the data, which I know that you and Cody are experts at, then having that data to tell the story. And I consider myself the chief story officer and you all the chief information officers, because together we can really assist and partner in communities to get things done.
We are
including,
always, go ahead.
I was going to say, including the criminal justice system and the jails, and I know the Sheriff's Association is interested in partnerships just to help assist in training and knowledge and improve their outcomes and lower their recidivism rates.
We're always happy to work with you, both Cody and I, when it comes to looking for, to remove these barriers when it comes to funding as well. I had one more question, Katrina, and I know that you have not really run into that with your grandchildren, but some of the kids who are born to mothers who have used during pregnancy have very severe neonatal abstinence syndrome, and and during, like after their birth, their ACE score is usually very high. Have you felt that our educational system is equipped with helping these kids throughout their early life and early education and later on, or what can be done? What is needed?
I think we're making steps in the right direction. We're talking more about ACEs, and that's important. We're talking about social determinants of health, and that's important. I don't know that early childhood and even child care centers are equipped to recognize some of the needs that come with children, and certainly I think if we follow data trends and different collection measures of ADHD, what we're going to see is a spike of these kids are hyperactive. So then the spike of ADHD, the spike of ADHD medication, and we already seen it in this generation that is currently suffering the most from the opioid crisis and epidemic. They were there's a large percentage that were highly diagnosed with ADHD. And I don't think it's because they were necessarily exposed in utero to an opioid, but obviously it was a different time and people smoked during pregnancy and they drank during pregnancy and there was lead-based paint and all of those other things that happened that could have contributed. But I do think that we're getting there. I'm very optimistic because we're talking openly about what was hidden for so long, and we're removing stigma, and people are coming out with, you know, organizations like Faces of Recovery, and it's Recovery Month. So I've seen a lot of stuff on my social media in regards to people are not as fearful to tell their story as they once were. And I think that's what it's going to take to make those necessary changes. But as it sits right now, I would have to say our educational system isn't ready.
Thank you so much, Katrina, for your insight on this. Do you have any suggestion for grandparents who are in your situation with their grandkids?
Use your support systems, whether that is your friends, your family, your church, your Facebook group at 2 a.m. It's so important not to keep things bottled up inside. I journal a lot. It was a way for me to express myself and not carry things with me, carry those emotions with me. And like I said, if someone were to read those, they would probably, if they were credentialed to do so, diagnose me as clinically depressed, including suicidal ideations. And that's hard to say. When you feel like giving up and there's no other way out, you know, that's serious, and you need an intervention. And I needed those interventions at times during this journey.
It is said that it takes a village to raise the kids. So I think that's what you're referring to in this situation as well. We need all that support, especially the loved ones of the patients who are suffering from substance use disorder. They need to take care of their own mental health as well. You cannot help your loved ones if you're not taking care of yourselves. So that is a message that I think should go out to all the community, to people who are suffering from substance use disorder and the people who are around them, who are their family, is in order to take care of your loved ones, you need to take care of yourselves as well.
Absolutely.
Anything else, Dr. Mullen, that you would like to add? Do we have any questions that anyone wants to ask Katrina regarding her story or any of the things that she had mentioned during her presentation?
Again, I want to highlight just related to stigma and things like that. We do have that link that you can ask a confidential question. If you do have a confidential question for Katrina, I'm sure you can, I know you can complete that. We will share that with Katrina, and one of us will get back with you. Katrina also, thankfully, at IRHA, we're very thankful. Katrina is one of our board members. So we get to interact with Katrina on a regular basis. I'm very, very honored to have her serving on our board of directors. So thank you, Katrina, for your time with us today.
My pleasure. Anything I can do.
Well, thank you, Katrina, so much for sharing your family story. We've seen that a couple times now at different events, and every time I catch a new little nugget of the story that I've missed and how it all pieces together. Are you with us today?
Hi, I am with you.
There we are, and we can hear you loud and clear. So at this time, I'd love to open it up for any questions that anyone has, or if anyone wants to unmute themselves to ask a question directly to Katrina. I like the backdrop, Katrina.
Got to promote what we promote.
So I know you were with us a couple weeks ago and gracious enough to share your story, and I kind of caught you off guard. So hopefully this doesn't catch you off guard. But are there any updates to share? I know we recorded that. Well, been about 2 months ago that we recorded that. But any updates on your family story?
A couple. We are still looking at a hopefully a November release date right before Thanksgiving. Things are going well in the substance abuse program within the Department of Correction for my daughter. Kindergarten has been amazing, and my granddaughter is doing great. She's already been student of the week, so that is kind of the proud badge moment. Camden is a normal 19-month-old in the realm of he is into everything. So,
So no rush for you right now, huh?
Not yet. I'm getting closer.
Well, we do have a question that came in through the chat from Michelle asking, what treatment did your daughter try, or has she tried over the process?
It would probably be a shorter list to say what she didn't try. We did Suboxone, we did Subutex, we did methadone, we did safe recovery, we did classic 12 steps, smart recovery. I'm sorry, I said safe recovery. So she's really, she's been through the DBT and the CBT group settings at various treatment centers throughout the state. I won't name those facilities, but we went to 5 different facilities. So she has seen a lot of treatment models, and to be honest, I just don't think she was ready at that time, or she wasn't buying in. And I will tell you another piece that has been very helpful for me and helping others is that the one time she called me, Mom, I'm ready. This time I'm serious. I'm done. I can't do this anymore. I'm pregnant. It's time. She even failed my recovery program. She even went into my program and still relapsed. But when she was truly, truly ready, she was denied admission because she had benzodiazepines in her drug screen. And of course, you know, those are very dangerous. Cody, people, those can be fatal in the withdrawal process. So the one time she reached out for help, her perception was the substance use disorder community failed her. When she needed it, they wouldn't take her. And so she had a huge mistrust in healthcare and the healthcare workers, and they only care that you have private insurance or, whatever the newest excuse was at that time. They didn't mind billing my insurance. So that was one of those moments where I really learned a lot about, the system. How do we make the system better so that people know that, polysubstance, which is not even a real thing in DSM-5 anymore, is the norm. You'll take anything to feel well. So we have to start preparing our providers, our programs to, if they can't take those people that are going to have things like Xanax and Klonopin and Valium in their system, what safety net do they have in place in their programs in order to get them to a place that can handle that kind of acuity?
Absolutely. Other questions for Katrina from the audience? Dr. Anwar, do you have any questions?
I have questions. First of all, I saw those cute pictures that you post on Facebook. How are you doing with handling that hair, the Camden's hair? I know you were getting into trouble with working with that.
One day at a time. That's all you can do is just one day at a time, and take care of yourself. Use your
That's true.
support systems. Those support systems are critical, and I am very, very fortunate to have those. So many people don't.
That's great. So we had a presentation, Katrina, I don't know if you were on, about a transitional housing for women, in which there was some talk about teaching life skills to women who are in recovery. Now that your daughter you have a release date in mind, and she would be reuniting with her kids, has she received any of that through her stay at the criminal justice system? And how is your family preparing the kids for that transition? Because up until now, and that happens to all of these families that are going through this, they have seen you and the mother figure. So now this is this new person, which they know and they've talked with, and you mentioned something that her son was able to connect with her at some of the visits. But how are you guys preparing for that? Are there any resources available for families to prepare for that?
The life skills training I can't speak to. I've looked at some of the curriculum that is provided by IDOC, and it's phenomenal. I mean, it really is the full continuum of care in a correctional setting, but I can't speak to the content of how much life skills training is there. I know it's necessary, obviously. And as far as our preparation, we've done what every normal person does and assess the worst case scenario and the best case scenario, and kind of prepare for the worst and hope for the best as far as the legalities surrounding guardianship, etc. But the transition to the children, you know, kids are very resilient. And we know there's a biological connection to parents and children. So I always tell Caitlin, they're the only ones that know what your heart sounds like from the inside, to keep her invested. And I firmly believe that they do know that. My granddaughter is 5, she's almost 6. She understands and makes a clear delineation between I'm her grandma. She refers to me as Nanny 90% of the time. And then with Camden, I think it will be extremely different for him, because she has seen him on video visits and done virtual things. And if you open a laptop in front of him or a phone, he says mommy. He expects mommy to be on the other end, but I don't think he truly knows who mommy is. And now he can say nanny. So I have 2 of them yelling nanny, and then he'll call me mom sometimes. So it's really going to be trial and error, I assume, in making that transition. But the long-term plan is for her to be there in our home, which is the best environment for the children, to not uproot them from routine structure, school district, etc. And she has to learn as much as they do.
That is so true. And that's going to be, like you said, it's going to have its ups and downs like any other journey of recovery. So good luck to you and your family for that.
Thank you.
And go ahead, Dr. Mon.
Go ahead.
So I just had one last thing. I always ask you to give your wisdom on this, to guide any other families who are going through this, and what are the support systems that they need to reach out to, or how to get through this difficult time. And for some of them, the parent might not be returning back into the lives of the children. Unfortunately, that is the case too. So can you just give some pearls of wisdom?
Well, I think obviously my backdrop is the Be Well Indiana resource. We want to provide during this time, especially this pandemic time where we don't have as much interaction, but Al-Anon is a great resource. You have to really start where you're at. A lot of faith-based organizations provide great support for families, family counseling, professional counseling, pastoral counseling, your family support systems, even if it is all, virtual like we're doing now, it's something is better than nothing. And then, of course, knowing your limits and saying, hey, it's okay to ask for help. It's okay to not be okay. And for moms, that's hard because, you know, we're supposed to be the end all. We fix everything. We kiss things better. And it's necessary. You have to have a break. You have to have some respite in your life, or you will lose it. I still have moments where I feel like I'm losing it.
Thank you so much. And I'm so glad that you're keeping it together. You're moving forward and reaching out to all those resources that are so needed. Like you said, respite care, you need to put on your mask first and then help the others is what we hear when we are going on an aircraft. And it's kind of like the same with this situation as well. So good luck again. Dr. Mullen, do we have any other questions for Katrina?
None have come in, but we'll be seeing Katrina on Thursday. She also gracious us by serving on our board of directors. So we'll be seeing her on Thursday. So if you do have any other questions that come in, please feel free to send those in so we can get those to Katrina, and we'll follow back up with you as well. So Katrina, thank you so much for sharing your story, your family story with the community so many times over the last few weeks. And we really appreciate that.
Thank you.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.